Hey everybody, it's James Lindsay. You're listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point-like summary of a single topic from woke that we need to understand so that we can beat it. And I appreciate all of your support out there. Just to let you know, if you will, like, subscribe, share this material, get the useful material that I'm putting out there into the hands of more people, and help us keep doing this. Today we're talking about the crucial difference between left and right, and I'm sure you can imagine a lot of them, and I'm sure you can envision a lot of directions I want to take this, or could take this, and there are a lot of actual differences between left and right, but I want to boil it down to one particular distinction between the two, and that is that I want to address this issue of whether or not, we're looking at a both sides problem, or what the both sides problem is all about. You've probably heard this before, right? That, there's extremism on the left and there's extremism on the right. There's a woke left and there's a woke right. It's a both sides problem. And it's not, actually. It is true that there is extremism on the left and on the right. It is true that there is a woke problem on the left and a woke problem on the right. But it is not true that this is a both sides problem. I don't want to get too, nitty gritty about it. But the fact of the matter is that if we look at overall proportions and degrees of adherence, what you have is a large body, relatively speaking, on the left who are at least fairly to moderately committed to an extreme view of politics, and a relatively small body on the right who are committed to an extreme view of politics. You have a basis of sympathy for that extreme view of politics on the left that is also larger than the range of sympathy for the extremist politics on the right. So if you kind of looked at it in sort of three blocks on each side, the committed radicals, their sympathizers, and then kind of normal people, what you see is that the committed radicals are far bigger on the left than on the right, that the sympathizers are far bigger on the left than on the right, and that the relatively normal people are therefore far bigger on the right than on the left. So this is not a both sides problem in the fact that what we're seeing is equal on each side. And part of the reason is that the logic that's causing the problem is the logic of leftism. And what I want to talk about is the fact that we have to understand, there's an old saying, there before the grace of God go I, that there is an underlying substrate to all of this that is a both sides problem. And that both sides problem is the problem of temptation, the temptation to power, the temptation to sacrifice principles in order to win, so to speak. Because if you sacrifice what you are and what you're defending to win, did you really win? No, not really. You've lost by other means. But we know what that means, right? To be able to take power, to take control, to exert force to maintain and establish order for our view. That's what's meant by this. And so this temptation to step into power in order to win is, in fact, a both sides problem. This temptation to sacrifice principle, to sacrifice superordinate concerns. What are superordinate concerns? A superordinate, or sometimes it's pronounced supraordinate. It's two different spellings. I think they mean the same thing, but I'm not 100% sure. A supraordinate identity is one that is bigger than the people involved. So you could say that the Republicans and the Democrats are two political identities, but that American is superordinate to it. So a superordinate identity is bigger than these subordinate identities. Does that make sense? Superordinate versus subordinate. Okay, so one of the things that you can do is step into your subordinate identity, and in the attempt to gain power for your faction, for your politics, that you can forget the superordinate identity. That temptation is a both sides problem. We call it tribalism. The temptation to tribalism, political tribalism, is a both sides problem. So the temptation to be degenerate in our approach to how we see politics, that it's a power-driven affair, that somebody must win, and the temptation to lose sight of superordinate identities. When St. Paul says there's neither Jew nor Greek, for example, he's appealing to a supraordinate identity in Christian identity rather than a subordinate in your ethnic or other status origins. Okay, so those are two temptations, and those temptations are a both sides problem. And that temptation to power, which is degenerating, is certainly a both sides problem. So what's the fundamental difference between left and right? Is that the left has succumbed to these temptations far more than the right has succumbed to these temptations. And I say far more because, like I said, there are extremists and there are a growing body of extremist sympathizers on the right, while on the left they already have a well-developed extremist ecosystem. So it is more and longer that the left has succumbed to this. And it's because the philosophy they're running is leftist. Leftist philosophy actually subordinates the means to the ends. So they believe that their end is this liberation of everything. So the means justify the ends. The ends justify the means is the saying. And what that means is that the idea that they're going to achieve their political goals by any means necessary is on the table. So principle's less important. Forming allyship with people who will be co-belligerents. For example, think of this Queers for Palestine, and you think, how in the world does that go together? Well, that's an alliance of expedience. But this logic has a name. This leftist coalition building or solidarity driven or allyship logic that we've all come to understand. Look at it in the trans circumstance, where you have, on the one side, you have trans allies, and they're supposed to do whatever the trans activists say, and if you don't, you're probably not a good ally, and you're going to get bullied and kicked out, and plus you never did enough anyway, so you're still going to get bullied, just not kicked out for that. And then you have on the other side, you have trans allies on the one side, and on the other side, in this coalitional politics thinking that's constantly in conflict, you have transphobic bigots. So everybody in society is split into one of these two categories. They are either a trans ally, in which case they're like friends to the trans agenda, or they're a transphobic bigot, in which case they're enemies to the trans agenda. And because the way their politics works is that anything done against enemies is justified, which includes an ally who's not a good enough ally. The core group can turn on the alleged ally in a beat of a heart and throw them out or disgrace them or struggle session them or ruin them or whatever else. And we've seen that happen lots of times. This logic in politics is called the friend-enemy distinction. It is that at the end of the day, politics boils down to an existential struggle between factions that see each other as genuine threats to the existence of their own belief or way of life. It is this belief that you have a existential war-like situation between the two factions that thus hold themselves in the regard of mutual enmity. They do not like each other. So think about how that works. You've got, like I said, trans ally versus transphobic bigot. You've got anti-racist versus racist with no possibility of being not racist. You have people who are on the proletarian communism style left versus everybody else who has bourgeois values or is part of the bourgeoisie or capitalist class. You have fascists and anti-fascists, which points technically now in both directions. You get the idea. So this is the friend-enemy distinction in politics. Of course, the Nazis embraced the friend-enemy distinction in politics also. For those of you that listen to the Nazi Experiment podcast series, there's a couple episodes talking about Carl Schmitt, who named the friend-enemy distinction. They had the people who were helping to support the Reich, which is to say, really, in the name of the folk. And so they were members of the folk and supporters of the folk, which were the German Aryans, as Hitler saw it, ethnic Germans building the Nazi state, who had a monopoly of the friend-enemy distinction, as Carl Schmitt explained, versus the enemies of the folk. You had Mao Zedong doing this with the people and the enemies of the people. You have this logic in Herbert Marcuse's repressive tolerance essay, where he defines the answer to the problem of repressive tolerance in society to be liberating tolerance, which he defines explicitly as extending tolerance to movements from the left and withdrawing tolerance from movements from the right, including not just in deeds but in words. He says, in fact, to go so far as censorship and pre-censorship, which he defines as preventing the words or the ideas from ever entering the minds of the potential reactionaries who are named as enemies. When we talked about Mao Zedong and his red classes and black classes, red class was friends, black class was enemies. It's the exact same logic again and again and again. The Soviets, of course, used it. Marx's fundamental framing in the Communist Manifesto of all of history proceeding through a conflict of antagonistic classes. The classes are the factions, oppressor versus oppressed. And the oppressor becomes the enemy class, and the oppressed become the friend class. And you get every branch of the Marxism we're dealing with in society today downstream from that. So what's happened to the left is they were tempted by the ability to do identity politics, which is to throw out that superordinate identity in order to create powerful coalition blocks that could enforce their political will, seize the means of production, so to speak, and enforce their political will. And so what they did was they traded principle for power. They traded higher order identities like that we're all American for the factional, fanatical cult view of their faith in communism or leftism more broadly, Neo-Marxism, woke, whatever you want. And they lost themselves. So we are not facing a both sides problem in America. The left and right do not share this problem equally. Yes, there is a woke left, and yes, there is a woke right, and yes, the woke left is bad, and yes, the woke right is bad, but they're not both equal. They're not both equal because something that is equal, which is human temptation, has been given into more on the left, who've largely adopted the friend-enemy distinction in politics, than it has on the right. But we are being invited, both by the behaviors on the left and by the radicals on the right, reacting to those behaviors on the left, into the friend-enemy distinction ourselves. Let's form our own identity coalitions. Let's form our own blocks. Let's sacrifice our own principles. Let's take no enemies to the right and tolerate their bad behavior. Let's admit evil to answer evil. Let's not turn the other cheek because that's all weak and losing. Let's abandon conservatism because it has failed to conserve, etc. This is the invitation into the friend-enemy distinction for us, and what has made the left what it is as the left, that which we are trying to stop and to fight, is that they adopted the friend-enemy distinction much more thoroughly and have enforced it much more effectively to consolidate power on their side for far longer. But that temptation faces us all, and we're all invited into it. So why do I spend so much time just as a kind of a parenthetical bookend on the woke right if the woke left is obviously the main problem that bears explanation? And the answer is because that if we are not able to mount a strong and effective defense rooted in principle that can occupy the moral high ground, which is the only place from which you can win a spiritual war. If you believe we're in a spiritual war, which you would be agreeing with me if you do, you can't win a spiritual war by losing the moral high ground. You have to maintain it. You cannot become that which you are fighting. You cannot cavort with demons if your goal is to stop evil. It's simply not possible, and I understand that it makes it harder. But what I'm worried about is that this small faction on the right, which is targeting the large coalition called MAGA, that has started to right the ship of America, from which most of the rest of the world will be able to be righted because America is that exceptional and that amazing and that fantastic. This woke right coalition has the potential to disband, discredit, weaken, and undermine this coalition in this crucial moment so that this small faction of radicals on the right can undo all of our hard work that we've had over the past period of time, past 5 to 10 years, while the woke left can play off of them, recruit, gain strength, and scatter to the winds the principled, moral, Christian, American resistance to them. So that's why I spend so much time on the woke right, even though it's smaller, even though this is not a both sides problem in that regard. But I remind you, as the more frustrating things get, this is what drove the left to this temptation. They had their idealistic vision of a liberated society, of an anti-racist society, of a society that's no longer homophobic and transphobic or sexist or misogynist or capitalist or classist or whatever their motivation happens to be, climate change, whatever the motivation, they have their idealistic vision of a world that does not exist, and in their frustration and desperation to try to bring it about through the democratic processes, they decided that's not possible and chose a different concept of the political, the friend-enemy distinction, and radicalized themselves and consolidated their power in this evil madness. And that temptation visits us, and the longer it takes to stop the left, the harder it is to stop the left, the more frustrated we get, the more that temptation presents itself. The long, hard work ahead of us will be lost if we take that temptation. But the distinction between left and right that really matters now, the reason that radicalism and violence and so on are not a both sides problem, is because the left gave in to the temptation of power and the right mostly has not. And may we continue not taking that dark temptation.